Hey everyone, please feel free to continue to grab lunch. But this is an important talk, so I want to give Dr. Sherraden as much time as possible. Welcome to the Centennial Lecture Series. We appreciate you being here today. This is part of our year-long celebration of being 100 years old at the Brown School. And so with that, we're celebrating 100 years of excellence. I want to thank first the faculty subcommittee, which is led by Tanya Edmond and Shenyang Guo, who have developed a series of lectures highlighting the key areas that have been prominent in our school over those 100 years. The Brown School has been a leader in social policy and has made significant contributions locally and nationally and internationally over the last 100 years. I want to thank Michael Sherraden, the George Warren Brown Distinguished University Professor and founding director of the Center for Social Development at Washington University in St. Louis, for taking up the charge to discuss social policy and particularly his groundbreaking research. Dr. Sherraden has worked at the Brown School. Am I allowed to say this, Dr. Sherraden, when you joined? Since 1979. He was a child prodigy that was hired when he was 11 years old. Well, the focus of his scholarship is on building institutions and policies for positive change. His research, as well as the work of CSD, has had substantial policy impact, not only in the US, but around the world. For example, his work on the US Civilian Conservation Corps of the 1930s and on international examples of non-military service contributed to the creation of AmeriCorps in the United States. Did you all know that? Right? In another area of applied research, he defined the concept and theoretical foundation for universal, progressive, and lifelong asset building, and initiated a program of rigorous research with evidence leading to asset building policy innovations. Based on CSD research evidence and policy advising 6 million children in the United States and more than 20 million abroad have an asset building account opened automatically at birth. It's amazing. Talk about impact. Dr. Sherraden has been honored in many, many ways, so I will share just a few. He was a Fulbright Scholar. He was in the inaugural class of the Academy for Social Work and Social Welfare and received Swear's Distinguished Career Award. He was honored as a social work pioneer by the National Association of Social Work Foundation, and he was named one of the 100 most influential people in the world by Time magazine. Are you uncomfortable? I know. Okay, he wants to just talk about his research, y'all. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Sherraden here today for his talk, Research and Social Policy Impacts at the Brown School.
Thanks, Dean Traub. I'm really honored to be here. I was thinking, I have been here quite a long time. I was thinking coming here how many meetings I've been in Brown Lounge, and I think the number has to be at least over 5,000. It's I mean, and we're in Brown Lounge, and some of you may not know the portraits of George and Betty Brown are hanging here. George is back here. You can't quite see him. George always looks a little bit like he's not quite sure what's happening here. And Betty, who after George's death gave the money for the school and to build this building and an endowment back in the 30s, Betty looks like she thinks she did the right thing. So that's always our context in Brown Lounge, having our George and Betty on the wall looking down at us, and they are the most steady thing in the building. The rest of us change, but George and Betty stay the same. I have a lot to say. This is a big topic, and there's a lot has happened as as Dorian said, a lot has happened in policy in the Brown School over all these years. I can only talk about part of it, and I'll be glad to do that. I'm going to use. I wanted to stay on topic. I didn't want to just start. I can easily start talking. It sounds, a little bit like Donald Trump, just talk for 3 hours and not say that much. But I didn't want to do that, so I did actually write out, and I may do a little bit of reading and then commentary, and we'll try to stay within the time that's allotted to us. So this is social work and social research at Brown Lounge, and if I can find the right keys here. Yeah, good. So social policy has, first point I want to make is that social policy has always been a fundamental part of social work. Social work aims to take care of people, of course, but social work also aims to improve conditions and to summarize that, most of that improving conditions is social policy work. It's about people's circumstances and how they're able to cope in the world. Both of these have always been an important part of social work. For example, social work has been a major leader in social policy beginning in the early part of this century with maternal and child health care in the community. This was a social work leadership that started that and greatly reduced maternal deaths in childbirth. Deinstitutionalizations of poorhouses and orphanages. Some of you probably know this history. We used to lock up a lot of people just because they didn't have the resources to be outside of the institutions. And social workers largely deinstitutionalized, especially for children in orphanages. There's a remarkable meeting in the White House in 1909, Teddy Roosevelt was president. Social workers were leading the meeting, and it was a national conference on children. They decided at that meeting that they would get these kids out of the orphanages. I love this example because it wasn't that it just happened. The social workers at the meeting decided and started to deinstitutionalize, and as a result of that, there were, at the time, hundreds of thousands of children in orphanages, and that number went down dramatically after that. And part of the reason it went down was because social workers created what was called outdoor relief. That means support outside of an institution. And outdoor relief was a cash payment, which is a very common type of social policy now. We're well familiar with it, but social workers instituted that as mother's aid laws and Missouri was one of the earlier ones in the teens, right after the Progressive Era. Social workers created the U.S. Children's Bureau. This was Grace Abbott. Grace Abbott was the sister of Edith Abbott. Edith Abbott was dean at the Chicago School. Grace Abbott was a remarkable social worker and who created all kinds of federal policy. But she's known for having said that social work is uphill all the way. So I frequently end up quoting her. And child welfare policies, youth development, recreation for youth and youth groups was a big part of social work in the early part of the last century. And there's a lot that focus has continued including in mental health services and in youth preparation for labor markets and many other ways. Social work has been a leader in citizenship rights and participation, including voting access and civil rights, very active in women's suffrage movement and very active in the civil rights era. This is a history that we should be proud of. And retirement and disability security, so Security Act, and I'll discuss these together, labor conditions and safeguards, the Fair Labor Standards Act. Social Security Act 1935, Fair Labor Standards Act 1938. These are both the creation of Frances Perkins. Frances Perkins, a social worker, who first female cabinet secretary in the United States, Secretary of Labor. And when Franklin Roosevelt asked her to be Secretary of Labor, she said, well, I'll consider that job if we can create retirement security for old people and improve working conditions for all workers. And Roosevelt kind of looked at her and said, well, do you think you can do that? And and then she did. So this is really the backbone of the New Deal. These are the two most important social policies in the nation's history. This is social work has been involved in this in policy work as leadership, and Perkins, of course, is the most outstanding one. A lot of people don't even know this name. Had she not been a woman, Frances Perkins would be a lot more famous figure than a lot more known figure than she is. Over time, I hope that will change. See, I can ramble on like Donald Trump. And also innovations in non-military service that's not about fighting, but service that's about building. So the Civilian Conservation Corps, the 1930s, that was my dissertation topic, I'm glad to say. Contributing a little bit to the creation of AmeriCorps with that work. And Silver Corps, Nancy Morehouse in the room has done research on Experience Corps, and we had work on productive aging at Center for Social Development, which Nancy has continued. This is about old people providing some kind of service to the country. This idea, I think, will probably grow during this century, as if labor markets are not as necessary as they were. If artificial intelligence starts doing a lot of the work for us, then we will have to find ways for humans to contribute and feel good about work. And this area of work, I think, will probably continue to grow. And decarceration in jails and prisons. Okay, I'm taking too long. Social work and social policy at Washington University. From its first days, social work at WashU has included a strong emphasis on policy. Indeed, the focus on social policy and social development are the backbone of the school's rise to prominence. This is my thesis in this talk. I'm probably a little bit biased, you have to realize, but my thesis here is that social policy has always been an important part of this school. The origin of the school was the School of Social Economy, which it was a Missouri School of Social Economy, started separately, not in WashU, was taken into WashU. The purposes were to train social workers and to conduct research on social policy that would contribute to reforms during the Progressive Era. George Mangold was on the faculty, along with Roger Baldwin. Baldwin later went on to found the American Civil Liberties Union. These and other faculty members were guiding social reform during that period. Probably, these are some of the examples of that research. This is Brown School, or Washington University social work history. Research on lodging houses in the community, services for the blind and disabled, prenatal care and infant mortality care, as we mentioned, food safety, working conditions and minimum wage, mothers' pensions, women's suffrage. These were topics that were happening in this school starting in 1909 when the School of Social Economy came into WashU. But it didn't last that long. The school was closed, or the university separated its association with the school in 1915. The possible reasons include that seed funding from the Russell Sage Foundation had ended. There were expressed concerns about this research that was asking for social reforms, and the reaction to that in the community might create public relations problems. That's a familiar theme. And there was controversy when black civic leaders in the community were invited to speak to a social work class at Washington University. This was all women and all white women, and having the black people from the community speak to them created quite a stir. So for these various reasons, the school closed. And it didn't reopen again until 1925, and I think we're celebrating 100 years, so we're using this as the marking point, roughly, for 100 years. It reopened in 1925 in a newly configured at WashU School for Business and Social Administration, maybe a kind of safer place for these social work people. It later separated, became its own school, which you're now seated in. and in 30s, and funded by a gift from the estate of George Warren Brown, which I just talked about. I should say also that a stipulation of building this school, Betty Brown insisted on this, was that this room, Brown Lounge, be created, and that it always, in perpetuity, would be a place where people could come and meet and discuss, which is which is what we're doing today. So Betty Brown had a lot of foresight in many ways. The school during this period was led by Frank Bruno, another long-serving dean, but with sort of much less emphasis on research and social reform during that period. In my view, there were two truly exceptional deanships in the history of the school. One was Ben Youngdahl. I was honored to be the first Youngdahl professor at the school. But Ben Youngdahl was a leading national figure in social welfare policy. He raised the standing of the school from was a regional, really a regional school to a national with national presence, and the school during that period moved into was considered to be one of the top 10 schools. The next really impactful deanship was Shanti Khinduka from 1974 to 2003, a period of 30 years, the longest serving dean. And Shanti was a leading figure in international social development, and he raised the standing of the school to be number one. We were back and forth with the University of Michigan during that period, but sometimes we were the number one school. These were remarkable deanships. Youngdahl also integrated the student body on the Hilltop campus, now called the Danforth campus. So the first black students on the campus were social work students. Later, in the 1960s, the first black faculty on the Danforth campus were also in social work. So social work, school social work has played an important role in Washington University's advancement from a period of extreme racial segregation to a period when people can do a little better at working together. And it might be also a model for us in the years ahead here that Danforth or Youngdahl was also took very principled positions for rights and democracy during the McCarthy era, when people were being called in and accused of being communists and that sort of thing. And he took risks for himself and the school during that period and stood up for democracy. Dean Khinduka then came along, and Dean Khinduka had a very strong emphasis on research. Youngdahl did too, but Dean Khinduka pretty much doubled down on that, so that a lot more research was a lot more about the school was research oriented. So here is this is Larry Davis, one of our former colleagues. Larry passed away a few years ago. Larry's getting a chairship from E. Desmond Lee here under Mark Wrighton, and Shanti Khinduka is the person on the right side. Shanti's still alive, and I communicate with him. He's living down in Texas with his grandchildren and family members. The first two chaired professors were created by Shanti, and both in social policy. So I'm making this point about social policy emphasis. Martha Ozawa, who's no longer with us, was Shanti really, I think it's fair to say, one of the first things he did when he came in as dean in 1974 was hire Martha, who was a social policy researcher, studies the Social Security Act, and was well-known scholar in Social Security. Martha pointed out, I know I'm like Donald Trump now, I'm telling so many stories. Martha pointed out long before other people were talking about it that with the demographic pattern that we have, there's going to come a time when a lot of people of color are going to be working and paying for the retirement security of a lot of white people, and that's not going to necessarily be a very smooth pathway. And we're going to be in that period now, and Martha will have been right all along. Because there'll be pressure, more and more people talking about pressure on what to do about Social Security. It's, of course, people have very different views about that, but this is going to be an issue. And then I was the second chaired professor, also in social policy. And there I am. I think that's exactly 30 years ago. Wow. Um, So social policy research and impacts at the Brown School. Shanti co-founded the International Consortium on Social Development and promoted a lot of international exchange, and that affected many of the faculty in this school also during that time. And Professors Ozawa and Nancy Morrow Howe and others published research papers and actively engaged in policy discussions in the U.S. and abroad. Shanti asked me to start the Center for Social Development, which I eventually did in 1994. So that was his idea. CSD is now a stable center in the school with a modest endowment. It has what I would like to think is a pretty positive reputation. We do undertake rigorous research, and that we do have some policy impacts in the U.S. and abroad, as Dean Traub says, as many other people do on the faculty. We've always, so see, at CSD, we've always promoted the social work and social development traditions. Studying, and the social development tradition comes out of international work almost entirely, but there's a sort of, it's an oversimplification, but I would say more of a study of solutions instead of problems. So at CSD, we're not really that interested in studying disparities. We're more interested in studying what might be done so that everybody can prosper and do well. Okay, so an example of that is asset building research. The dean mentioned it. I won't go over that. We did create this idea. It was no one even used this language or thought about. There were no proposals that very low income people or people of color also needed to accumulate assets, not just have an income stream, but have some assets to invest in their future. So this idea has grown, and we have a very rigorous, long-standing social experiment in Oklahoma. It's a true experiment in a full population. This is quite uncommon, actually, and that experiment's still running, and I think we're in our 18th year, and we've had a lot of evidence, and because of that evidence, I love this example because this is like what applied social research. This is what we're going for, and we've been lucky, but people have also worked hard. But because of this data, we've been able to take this idea outside of the research project. So now 7 U.S. states have laws passed to open accounts for all children at birth. I don't want to over-exaggerate here. So they're in various stages of development, but the laws are passed and they're working on developing them. Okay, and this idea also now has moved outside of the U.S. It moved first to the United Kingdom, where for only 5 years, between 2005 and 2010, they were opening an account for all kids at birth, and then the government changed, and that policy doesn't exist. But those kids, those 5 cohorts, actually they did 7 cohorts because they went back a couple of years. Those 7 cohorts of kids still have that account and have money accumulated for their post-secondary education. And then there are examples here from other places. I'm proud to say that CSD has worked in all of these policy initiatives and provided evidence from CEDOK and consultation and policy formation. The most recent country to create kids accounts is Kazakhstan. This is an oil and gas rich nation, but low to middle income. Lots of income inequality. But they announced, this is also a really good Brown School story, because the beginning of this really started with the work of a doctoral student who's now a research professor at CSD, Aytakin Hussein-Lee. Aytakin is in Azerbaijan now. or in the air going there. So she's not in the room. But Aitaken did a doctoral dissertation. We designed it at CSD, and we provided, because we had a little endowment, we can support some doctoral students for doing things. So we're able to support her field research. I won't go into the details, but because of that field research, the leadership of Kazakhstan started to become interested in child development accounts. That was back in like 2017, 18. And this year, they opened an account for all 7 million children in Kazakhstan. So every child in Kazakhstan has an account, and they're using their national fund. They have a sovereign fund which is accumulated from fossil fuel wealth, basically, and they're taking half the earnings of from their sovereign fund every year and putting it into a separate fund that's then distributed to children. So this is quite a lot of money. So the first year in Kazakhstan, this was $700 million. And it's a low income and smaller country. So if you adjust, just to give you an idea of what this means in terms of the importance of the policy, if you adjust for GDP per capita and also population size, then that amount of money in the United States would be $50 billion. Not quite 50, actually. It's like $47 billion. So this is, and I make that point because to show that this is a large policy response in a country that is just not it's not impoverished. They do have oil and gas wealth, but certainly not nearly as well developed as we are. Now, why did they do this? This is the really interesting part. Kazakhstan took this decision because they recognize that their oil and gas wealth is limited. So they made a conscious decision to take the money while they had it to invest in their children so they could build a different economy. This is why they're doing it, and they will be presenting in Baku, Azerbaijan. And this is why Aitaken is flying over there today. In Baku, be presenting this example, and in fact, we're invited. I'm invited to present also at the highest levels of the COP29 meeting, where the heads of states and ministers confer. We will present this policy model as a way of low-income nations that have resource wealth, how they can, and if there's going to be an energy transition, which everybody knows there will be, how can they make the energy transition? So this is an interesting example of social policy, interacting with other types of policy. And I think actually, I would like to believe this. I think social policy really is only just beginning to get into its potential in the world. I think that, for example, social policy can play a lot larger role in what we call geopolitics, how nations get along with each other, especially in areas of strife. Could, for example, we have social policies, and kids accounts are maybe the easiest ones to do. Could we have social policies that cross borders so that people can at least have something in common and maybe be a little less likely to turn to militarism for solving their problems? So I think the outlook for social policy is really just wide open. There's so much that can happen, and I really think will happen over time. If humans manage to, we don't kill ourselves on this planet, we're going to have to figure out how to get along together and have everybody support it. So looking to the future, we're very fortunate to be in a period where social policy is being championed strongly by the current dean. So Dean Traub has articulated in her inaugural remarks, I was so pleased to hear her saying this on that day, that we should pay attention to social policy, and we should think about a new social contract. That's social contract is an idea that's been around for a while. It has a history, but basically means like what's the relationship of the state and the people, and this is social policy. This social policy territory. So Dean Traub is providing leadership and for this area, and as part of that, we're bringing some strength together in our school. So CSD will be merging with the staff and faculty and staff of the Social Policy Institute, and we're working together, and we're working hard on the integration. A lot of problems to solve and pulling people together in the same room, and getting and making it really a new Center for Social Development. I look at this as an entire turning of the page, a new Center for Social Development that, if we do our job right, will be positioned so that the next leadership can do do more interesting things and carry on this tradition, and with that merger, we're going to be able to address a lot more topics, including community education, a guaranteed basic income, more on child and youth development, and more work on housing, which the country desperately needs now, and more research work on social work professional development. So we're really looking forward to this period. We're really happy to be in this position. And it looks like this direction is pretty much the future of the school. So the school will have lots of features, and I'm pretty biased about this, but I'm really excited about the potential in social policy. So I got through that with plenty of time. So